Okay, William. In racing, there's three initials that strike terror into the heart of a lot of runners: DNF. So here I am. I'm going to take up some running. I'm halfway through a race. I'm not having a good day. I might as well quit, mightn't I? I mean, there's no real reason to force myself to get to the end if I'm not really going to achieve the distance or the goal that I set out with, is there?
Yes, well, this is quite a big subject, one close to my heart actually. DNFing, or did not finish, did not finish, or simply not finishing races. In ultra distance running, that is really a major feature of the sport, really. There's hardly any race at all where at least a third of the field don't finish, and it's not uncommon for more than half of the field to not finish. So really extraordinary high percentages of runners don't finish, they DNF in ultra distance races.
Sure.
And that's when I'm saying that, I'm talking about ultra trail races, ultra track races, ultra road races, really across the board. So it really is a big issue in ultra running. And obviously when it's the championship events, or you're representing your country, or even just regarding your own, trying to achieve your own personal targets, you know, it really is a big issue, and something that really does warrant serious thought.
Sure. So why so high a dropout rate? Are all these people getting injured? I mean, are they sort of like stumbling around with torn ankles and goodness knows what else? Or?
Well, I mean, I've been involved in ultra distance racing for over 17 years now, and the range of reasons why people DNF, I would say, breaks down into, number one, they get physical injuries. Something goes wrong, and either usually they decide they can't carry on. Otherwise, the race medical personnel will tell them they can't carry on due to illness or injury. Second one, I'd say, would be simply mental weakness or mental issues, and they simply can't force themselves on anymore. They lose focus in the race. Maybe the conditions become too hard during the race, and they just basically give up.
Sure.
So that's number two. And thirdly, is when they've got their sort of targets have been set wrong, and then maybe they've there's nothing wrong with the way they're performing as such, but they've probably set a target, perhaps one single target of a very high performance, and they fall slightly below that, and they then just make a decision to stop, to DNF, when really, of course, they could have carried on. There's no reason really why they couldn't have carried on, and I'd call that an error in goal setting. So yeah, I would say they were the three main areas where that caused DNFs. Yeah.
Well, okay, but injury is one thing. If someone literally injured, obviously they're not going to be able to continue under those circumstances. But in any other respect, let's say someone is falling behind on their goals, or they're simply a lot more tired than they expected to be, or something of that nature. I mean, it's not really a big deal then, is it? If they don't finish, they can just come off track and it's no harm done, surely. Well,
that all depends on what the goals are, doesn't it? I mean, my position is, my opinion is, you should always have a minimum of at least three goals when you go into a race. Preferably more, with intermittent targets along the way. Because let's face it, in every ultra race, probably every single competitor at one time or another sort of feels like dropping out. I mean, I felt, I mean, everyone does. It was just part of the event. That's part of the appeal of it. Overcoming the difficulties, running through the bad patches to the next good patch, all these phrases that people use. So yeah, I mean, I always remember some good advice I was given when I first came into ultras. Someone said to me, don't drop out until after you've felt like it more than 3 times. What he was trying to say was, everyone feels like dropping out during a race, but it's just a feeling, it's just a sensation. You don't actually do it.
Sure.
No, you do really need to decide and have a really good reason if you are going to DNF. Otherwise, just keep going.
And do you find, though, that if a person has dropped out of a race once, they're then more likely to do it again in future? Or? Well,
yes, I think this is one of my own. This is something I've really only seen as the years have gone by, and I've obviously I have been in ultras, as I said, for quite a long time now. And what I've noticed is that, as I call it, DNFing actually becomes almost like an illness, becomes like a disease in the sport with certain individuals. I mean, one extreme case I knew back in the 90s was someone, obviously I remain nameless, but he was a world 100k champion, and basically never finished another race, because every time he started, if he just fell very slightly behind how well he'd done in that world championship victory, he just stopped. And then it becomes self-fulfilling. I mean, basically he never quite hit the splits that he hit again in that he'd done in that one fantastic race, and he never ever finished another 100k race. It just disappeared off the scene. But even slightly lower down the scale, I've seen many good runners, perfectly capable international standard runners, who've got into this habit of DNFing for no really good reason, except that they'd fallen behind their #1 target, and they never finished another race, and we ended up retiring. And it's such a sadness, it's such a pity, because one, it spoils their enjoyment of the sport. It's happening because they don't have proper goals, they're not setting their goals properly. And when I've spoken to some of them about it, they said that they didn't want a bad time on their card, they didn't want a bad performance on their CV, if you like. But the result of that was that they left the sport because they never finished another race. And I've seen it not just in 100k running, I've seen it across all the distances. And in my own, I feel that, if you shouldn't, I think your #1 target, the basic target for every runner going into a race, even the elites, should be to finish the race, but in whatever means they can, unless the medical staff at the race say they shouldn't continue. And please note, I am saying the medicals, not the runner themselves, because quite often the physical injuries can be up here as well. I've spoken to medical staff at races where they say a lot of runners are pulled out thinking they're injured, but it's just between the ears. It didn't. So what I'm saying is that the medical staff say that you shouldn't continue through physical injury or illness. Okay, obviously no argument. That's one thing. But otherwise you keep going, because you get far more from actually finishing the race than by DNFing, and with that awful feeling of failure and just a whole feeling of despair, and just all the negative connotations that go with it. So that's my advice. And also on top of that, you've got the situation where in many ultras, basically in ultra running, you've got two different types of event. One is fixed time, and the other's a fixed distance. But even in the fixed distance races, 100k, the various others, they often have very generous time limits. And I say you're having a really bad patch, take a break, just take a short break. Even 30 minutes can revive a runner. And then, of course, it's not going to be your best ever performance, but you've still got the satisfaction of finishing the race. And often you can learn a huge amount about many things, but especially about yourself, by continuing to the finish. And when it comes to fixed time races, 24 hours, 48 hours, multi-days, there simply is absolutely no reason to DNF. In fact, again, except of course if the medical staff advise you to do so. And I would say that you need never ever DNF in a fixed time race, because if things go dreadfully wrong, you can take a 1 hour break, 2 hour break, take a 6 hour break, and then start again, continue. Yes, of course you won't reach your #1 target, but you can still enjoy the race, learn from the race, you can be at the race throughout the whole duration. And you get far, far more out of it than DNFing, going home with your tail between your legs, with all the feelings of despair and disappointment that go with it.
So it's a little bit like the cliche of getting straight back up onto a horse if you've been thrown or something like that, that if you're not meeting your target, you think it's far, far better to go on, complete the race, even if it's way below the target you had in advance of the race, rather than just walk away.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, it all comes down to good target setting. Too many runners go into races with a single goal, and the minute that's threatened due to their own performance, due to weather conditions, basically the head goes down, they think everything's lost, and then as soon as they get the feeling to stop or to have whatever, then they just take it and take to their tents or their sleeping bags or just pull out. And there's simply no reason. There's no reason for it. And it does. The thing is, what the message I'd like to get across is that it does immense damage to the person, to their confidence, to future performances. It does far more damage to dropping out than continuing and having a lesser performance. And I know that from personal experience.
You've been running for quite a long time in your career. I mean, how many times have you ever DNF'd?
Well, good, yeah, thank you. Good, I'm glad you asked that. Yes, I have DNF'd, and once or twice subsequently I regretted it. but I haven't done it very often. I mean, I did my 100-kilometre career, 100 Ks, I did 18 of those, and I DNF'd once, and that was from medical opinion in the race, because I was coughing out blood, and it was a race held in freezing conditions, and basically I decided probably best not.
Most people would agree with you.
I got to more than halfway, so I let myself off for that one.
Yeah.
But that was the only DNF in a 100k. In the longer races, before I understood what I've now told you, that you simply do not need to DNF. I have done it once for physical, for what I call an injury, but it wasn't one diagnosed by the race. It was me saying I had an injury.
Yeah.
And I know now, with retrospectively, I could have just had a break and carried on.
Sure.
And I think I've done probably one other one. I think the last one was in 2005, and again that was a mistake, and I deeply regretted it. And it was that was the one that finally helped me to understand that you simply don't need to DNF in a 24-hour or 48 hours.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely remarkable the effect that a 1-hour break can have, no matter how bad your stomach. For my case, it was nearly always bad stomachs.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how bad the stomach, 1 hour's something to eat, or even just to lie down in a warm room for 1 hour can completely revive someone. All right, if you need 2 hours, have 2 hours, but then carry on, and often you can run strongly to the finish. Yes, of course you'll have a lesser total distance, but you'll have the higher finish in the race with all the celebrations at the end and everything else. So that's how I've come to these conclusions. And also by seeing what other runners have been doing, and it's been very, very disappointing. I mean, on their behalf, to see careers cut short, and people have this what I call the DNFing disease.
Well, certainly. I mean, from doing the blog coverage on your races and so on, although it's always great to see you win, it's always sad to know that you've won when a possible rival has pulled out somewhere in the race. Because you like to see you, if you like, actually beat them, not win by default, as it were. But I mean, you get a lot of kudos in the sport. You're, international standard, world class ultra runner. You hold, multiple world records. But as far as you're concerned, if you went off into a race tomorrow and you weren't meeting your targets, you would rather stick it out to the end, regardless, and come in with a bad finishing time rather than have DNF on your card.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, in fact, now just with myself and my team, we don't even have the word DNF. At all. We call it ERBs now, which means if you're feeling like a DNF, if things are going that badly, you don't DNF, you ERB, which means extended rest break.
Right. So
in other words, what I've just been saying, you have a break and then you carry on. And there's absolutely no way I would DNF from a race. I would just rather walk to the finish, soak up the atmosphere of the race, learn about the race, watch other runners, and complete the race, obviously with a lesser distance and way below my number 1 or number 2 or my number 3 target.
Sure.
But to be part of completing the race, because there's simply no point, there's no need to. And to me, I mean, I can think of one race I did back in 2004, an indoor 48-hour race. It was at the time I was still having horrendous stomach problems. I was leading the race after about the first 8 hours, absolutely flying. Had the most horrendous stomach and nausea problems, and the medical staff insisted I had a long break. I must have had a break of 5 or 6 hours. And then I thought, well, hang on, I've gone to the Czech Republic, I've gone to the race, I'm in a 48-hour, I feel fine now. I just walked to the finish. I walked for about 30 hours.
Right.
Yes, all right, my head was, was between my tail was between my legs to start with, but after a while, I thought, no, this is good. I'm getting the full 48-hour experience. Of course it's a disappointment. Yes, of course I'm disappointed. But what's the point of just lying in my sleeping bag and watching everyone go round? No, I'm part of the race. I'm feeling fine now. I'll just walk to the finish, and actually I just watch what other people were eating and drinking, and just try to learn something from the race like that. And I was able to have I did obviously recorded a distance or whatever at the finish. I appeared on the result sheet. I went home with my head held high that things hadn't worked out, but I'd at least done X kilometres during the race.
Yeah, and of course in a timed race, you have at least been there and doing it for the 24 or the 48 hours or whatever involved. And
you've been, in fact, funnily enough, years later I met a runner who'd been at that race, and he said he'd never ever forgotten me being there and how I'd actually gutted it out to the finish despite having had horrendous problems. So obviously other people had taken note. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, I mean, to me it was all part of building the mental strength, the mental stamina that I'm benefiting from now.
So really, your watchword is did not finish.
Definitely did not finish. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, if I can just turn you towards like two hypothetical scenarios, one of which may be involving a less well-trained runner, someone perhaps, for example, who's decided to take ultras up and is going to tackle their first ever 24-hour race, maybe even their first ever 12-hour race. Now, in that sort of scenario, what's your attitude towards them avoiding DNFing?
But normally what you find is the different mindsets when you compare, say, a very ambitious runner compared to, say, a newcomer to the sport, or someone with, well, you might say less ambitious from the point of view they've gone into the race with very, very conservative goals and targets. The DNF rate in the less ambitious runner is far, far lower compared to the very, very highly ambitious runner determined to do PBs or to achieve fantastic targets, because frequently the very, very ambitious runner will only have the one target, as I've said, and so they're absolutely at very, very high risk of DNFing, and sadly those runners very, very rarely last in the sport because they just simply don't stay in the sport and in the races long enough to build up the mental strength and experience that you need. Whereas the runner perhaps just trying a race for the first time, not ambitious and just wanting to work their way in there and just want to enjoy the experience of a 24-hour or 48-hour, often they're much less likely to DNF. So that's what you see.
So what you're basically saying is that, as you say, for a less ambitious runner, perhaps a newcomer, who goes in there perhaps with an attitude of simply wanting to complete a 12-hour race or complete a 24-hour race, they're actually far more likely to succeed in doing that because that's what their goal is.
Yeah, definitely, yes.
Yeah. Whereas with a more advanced runner, perhaps a more ambitious runner, they'll set off, they'll run hard, chasing a perhaps slightly unrealistic goal, but even if it's realistic for them, they chase this goal, it's not quite working out.
Yeah.
So rather than, say, accepting a slightly reduced goal, they'll quit.
That's it. No, instead of gutting it out and building that mental strength and fortitude, they just throw the towel in and have an early night, so that they're never actually experiencing the full length of the event at all.
Which is obviously not really a way to develop throughout your career.
No.
But, that's fair enough. So with the more ambitious athletes, shall we say, I mean, you've mentioned goal setting, and like in your training we tend to use 3 goals or more. Would it be reasonable to sort of suggest as a model that an athlete should have 3 goals, a highest one that they aspire to achieving but might be a real push, a more realistic goal that they think they're going to maintain, a slightly less ambitious one which they should be able to achieve if everything isn't perfect but they're running to form, but then if you like a base level goal that they finish. Yeah,
the base level goal must be that they finish. In whatever means, even if it just means walking to the finish, because you get far more out of the event and the experience if you do that, and that helps to stop this this DNF disease. It stops it spreading and becoming fatal.
Right.